he had just come back from Russia, and he was arguing that he should be negotiating the SALT talks. So, I mean, I was not present in the meetings when he was in Russia, that's for sure.
Okay.
But it did coincide with his return.
The last few weeks have turned the world on its head, haven't they? Donald Trump has ripped up the world order, or at least America's place in it. It's kicked up a lot of theories as to why he would be so accommodating of Russia at a time of clear aggression and threat to the West. The journalist has a bold and potentially controversial theory that Donald Trump is, in fact, a Russian asset. Craig Unger is the author of House of Trump and House of Putin, in which he makes that claim, and he joins us on Times Radio tonight. Hello, Craig.
Nice to be with you.
A real pleasure to have you, Craig. Thank you so much. Okay, look, there'll be people sat there listening to that tonight and sort of thinking, yeah, you know, he's been critical of Ukraine and supportive of Russia. He's had an odd relationship with Vladimir Putin. To call him a Russian asset, though, sounds a bit conspiratorial.
Right. Well, I don't think it's conspiratorial at all. In fact, you have to distinguish between an agent and an asset. An agent is someone who knows he's employed by a major intelligence agency. An asset is someone who's a trusted friend, a reliable source. And in fact, I go all the way back 45 years to 1980, when Donald Trump was first starting out as a big-time real estate developer in New York. And he develops the Grand Hyatt Hotel. And like any hotel, he has to furnish it with TV sets for every room. And where does he get them? He gets them from an electronics house called Joy Ludd that is later found to be a KGB front. FBI agents were parked outside it, investigating it for years. And you start to see a string of events in which again and again, people who are in the Russian mafia, which is tied to the KGB at the time, and people who are actually part of the KGB meet with Trump after hooking up with this KGB front that sells them the TV sets. A few years later, in 1984, a man named David Bogadin, who according to the FBI was tied to the Russian mafia, marches into Trump Tower. This is Trump's glitzy new building that has just gone up in the early 80s. And it's where he makes his reputation for the first time. And Bogadin puts down $6 million in cash and asks to buy 5 condos. And I found a total of 13 people who were tied to the closely tied to the Russian mafia and owned or bought several properties in Trump Tower and other Trump-branded properties again and again and again. And this became essentially a way of Trump laundering money for the Russian mafia and making a lot of money in the process.
Wow, it's a very serious accusation. Have they responded to that accusation?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to prosecute Trump for this because you have to prove that he has knowledge that the money is coming from illicit sources. We don't have that.
Because, Craig, that could very easily be a businessman doing business with some people and not necessarily being aware of their links to, or even bothering to check their links to anybody nefarious.
Well, Trump made a deliberate decision not to check their links. And I think it's more than coincidence when you end up having 13 Russian mobsters in Trump properties. And remember, they are tied to first the KGB and now the FSB, essentially Russian organized crime is an arm of Russian intelligence.
Sure.
So this is a very serious security breach.
What you're talking about there, though, is not necessarily Donald Trump knowingly acting on behalf of the Russian state. And I suppose that's where you talk about him being the difference between an asset, as you claim, and an agent, or even sort of knowingly being involved in something like that. But possibly, I mean, what we've sort of seen lately of, Prince Andrew and the alleged Chinese spy, and actually there's lots of people in business around the world who'll be doing business with people who, it turns out, unbeknownst to them, have links to states or are working for hostile parties. What you're talking about there, presumably, is Donald Trump being useful to Russians who want to do business with him.
Well, I think it's more than that, because if you go on and on through the years, there's so many episodes of this. And in 1987, you actually have the KGB send Trump to Moscow and to Leningrad, Leningrad, and when he comes back from there, he takes out a full-page ad in the New York Times that could have been ripped from the headlines yesterday because it's a full-fledged assault on NATO. Trump at the time had never expressed any political ambitions, and suddenly he is starting to run for the presidency in 1988. People forget about this. And he takes out a full-page ad in the New York Times that are essentially KGB talking points. It says America has to stop paying to defend countries that can well defend themselves. It's an assault on NATO, on the Western alliance. It's exactly what's going on today. And you see Trump doing that kind of thing an awful lot.
But he can also believe those things and them not necessarily be ideas planted by Russia. There are lots of people who take that stance, people who are isolationists, people who do not believe America or indeed Europe have a role on the international stage in the way that others do.
Well, there may be some people in the world, but certainly in the United States at the height of the Cold War, that was not the case.
Okay, an unpopular opinion for sure, but you see, but not necessarily that it was planted by Russia.
He had just come back from Russia, and he was arguing that he should be negotiating the SALT talks. So, I mean, I was not present in the meetings when he was in Russia, that's for sure.
Okay.
But it did coincide with his return.
Does it also not the sort of turn a blind eye to something that's very obvious, which is that Donald Trump, as we know, acts in the interest of Trump, right? You know, he isn't somebody who is, it would surprise me that he would be working for or working in favour of another state when really Donald Trump exists to work in favour of Donald Trump.
Well, absolutely, he's working for Donald Trump, and he was making loads of money from the Russian mobsters whose funds he were laundering. He was, in fact, his success as a real estate developer has been way overstated. He's had failure after failure. When he went into Atlantic City and built casino after casino, he ended up with 6 bankruptcies. And it was the Russians who bailed him out. And they bailed him out through the money laundering money and through franchising real estate developments and using his name.
Okay. Obviously, laundering money is a very serious accusation as opposed to just doing business with people who have links to the Russian state, etc. And obviously, Donald Trump isn't here to defend the argument, to defend his point on specifically on the issue of laundering. So let's just move on from that point for now. Is it not, though, that there are a lot of people in business, and actually, frankly, Craig, in politics, who do this too? That this is just really about soft power. It's about influencing foreign policy in countries. Starmer did it with taking an invitation to Donald Trump to meet the king. You know, we're talking here about big beasts of politics and business doing business on the world stage.
Well, yes, but back in the 80s, he was really not so much doing business on the world stage at all. He had never been outside the United States in terms of his work, as far as I know. So we're going, and you have I wrote 2 books on this, American Compromise and House of Trump, House of Putin. And the series of events that take place, there are dozens of them. I don't think we have time to go into all of them at this point. But I mean, it's true, it may be circumstantial, but there are hundreds and hundreds, there are dozens and dozens of such. And among the many sources I used, one was a former KGB agent named Yuri Shvets, who goes into great detail about how the Soviets recruited Americans back then. And he was in Washington station while the New York station for the KGB was recruiting Trump.
Okay. Again, obviously, those parties not here to give their side of the story there, and I'm sure that Donald Trump would refute and deny having been recruited in any kind of way or any of those other allegations. But an interesting insight and an interesting book. Craig, thank you for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. Craig Unger, who is the author of that spiky, maybe slightly controversial book, House of Trump, House of Putin, with us on Times Radio tonight.